Hey YouTubers, this is the Gold Standard Caesar 924 coming at you with a wrestling rematching series for you guys today. Now, unlike the previous installments of Wrestling Rematching where I just conduct a series of videos, but this is just going to be like a one-off, self-contained installment in this particular entry of the series. And since WrestleMania is around the corner, I figured at least I'd get one more topic video concerning about the WrestleManias over the years. And I was actually watching this particular pay-per-view last night on the WWE Network, and it inspired me to kind of come up on here and rather just doing a 30 plus minute review and rant about how horrible this WrestleMania was. But rather than doing that, I just might as well kind of provide some constructive feedback in regards to this show and basically doing some rebooking of this particular WrestleMania. And this is going to be in my Wrestling Reimagining entry will be for WrestleMania 27. Where exactly do I begin with WrestleMania 27? They had The Rock coming back for the first time in WWE in 7 years, hard to believe. And they basically built the show around him and his presence on the show, serving as the special guest host of WrestleMania. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with The Rock being at WrestleMania 27. I just don't really care about the idea of just The Rock just having WrestleMania just built around the show about on The Rock and, that he's back. He's energetic than ever. Just building the whole show like a whole Rock Kiss My Ass Club type pay-per-view. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I enjoyed watching The Rock growing up and all, but I just don't really see the necessity of having a pay-per-view just built around one particular star. I just never really saw the sense of that. But I mean, I would still keep The Rock on the show. I would still feature him, but I wouldn't like build the show all around him. And I think another problem that I had with WrestleMania 27 were just how much amount of backstage segments that there were. There was just a lot of goofy comedy that just spread throughout most of the show, like bacteria. And I felt like I was watching a 3 hour episode of Monday Night Raw. And I'm dead serious when I mention that because I know Monday Night Raw around this time was mostly centered around either like celebrity guest host or the anonymous Raw general manager, where there was months where they didn't have a particular authority figure to come up on there and operate the ongoings of Monday Night Raw. So they would always have like this laptop, and the lights would kind of flicker on and off to kind of give the audience their attention. And basically, in regards to how they sanction matchups on Monday Night Raw. So there was just a lot of goofy comedy that was just going on during this time period. It's very hard for me, having to relive through those moments during that 2010, early 2011 period. That was also another problem that I had with this pay per view. There was just way too many backstage skits and just too much Rock. I mean, as much as I love The Rock and all, but I think we could. I want to have Rock actually serve a purpose throughout this show and actually play a part without, basically building the whole show around him. I mean, I would still like spotlight him in some capacity, but I wouldn't necessarily like build the show all around him and stuff. There was also a couple matches on here that I think that really stunk up the joint as well. One match being particularly the match that everyone criticizes to this very day, that being Jerry Lawler versus Michael Cole, and just how not only just how terrible that it was, but the fact that it just dragged on way too long that it should. And I honestly don't really see the need of having Lawler and Cole just duking it out like actual athletes when these two guys, you have like Jerry Lawler. I mean, yeah, he was a former wrestler, but he was, mostly serving as color commentator at this point. Whereas Michael Cole this would be his first actual wrestling match, if I'm not mistaken. But this match didn't need to drag on as long as it did. And even during the post match celebration, I mean, that dragged on way too long as well. And everything just kind of felt very convoluted when they reversed the decision. Like they had Jerry Lawler win the match, but then all of a sudden the anonymous Raw GM reversed the decision so that they made Michael Cole the victor by disqualification. There was just a lot of convoluted bullshit that they were doing in that match, and I think that was one of the many examples of what went wrong with this pay per view. What else? The main event with The Miz and John Cena that felt really underwhelming. I mean, The Miz just wasn't the credible champion that he was during this time. He would be playing third wheel, whereas they were focusing more on John Cena versus The Rock, and Cena just trashing about The Rock, about how he sold out to Hollywood, how he left us throughout all these years, and yada yada yada. Basically, what they've been doing with Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, it's basically the same template that they've been using lately, and it automatically reminds me of this particular confrontation between Cena and Rock. So I think as far as the main event scene went during that time, like The Miz was just kind of viewed as an afterthought, even despite being the WWE champion at this time. So I mean, even the match itself wasn't really all that spectacular, and I mean, the match ended in like a freaking double count out for fuck's sake. The Rock would come out there to restart the match. I mean, granted, but it was just some very terrible ideas, or it was just a very terrible match in general. I would basically just rebook a good chunk of the show in terms of the matches. I'm just gonna kick things off here with this Wrestling Reimagining series, and for WrestleMania 27, I'm gonna try my best to cook up the best card that I could possibly come up with. So the first match I would have to open up the show would be for the Intercontinental Championship. Cody Rhodes going as champion, defending the belt against Rey Mysterio. Now they did this match in the actual WrestleMania 27, but the only addition that I have on here is that Cody Rhodes would be walking into the pay-per-view as the Intercontinental Champion. He would have won the belt from Kofi Kingston, probably at Elimination Chamber or on an episode of SmackDown. But I would definitely keep this match on the card, keep the build pretty much the same. Rey Mysterio on SmackDown, I believe they had like a match, and then like Rey Mysterio used the 619 and severely injuring Cody Rhodes by using his knee brace. And they were kind of playing up this little storyline where Cody Rhodes would sport this a mask that he was wearing during this time to kind of cover up his nose that was badly damaged. So I actually really like that stuff that they were doing. You know, Cody Rhodes back when he was referred to as Dashing Cody Rhodes and known for his charming good looks. And I actually like that iteration of Cody Rhodes. And I would actually keep this match on here. I mean, it wasn't really that bad. It went as long as it deserved to have gone. And I would have Cody Rhodes go over Rey Mysterio just like how it happened and walk out still your Intercontinental Champion. Then we have is the unified tag team title belts being up for grabs as well. I would actually have the Hart Dynasty going in as the champions, defending the belt against the Fortunate Sons. Now, for those that don't know, the Fortunate Sons, it was a tag team consisting of Joe Hennig, who at this time was known as Michael McGillicuddy, but for some reason they just referred to him as like an entirely different wrestler or character I was going to mention. And they also had Ted DiBiase Jr., who was, both of them were on the roster, but, Ted DiBiase wasn't really doing much during this time. So I kind of figured just have him and Michael McGillicuddy, who was part of Nexus, but I would have DiBiase join Nexus after Wade Barrett gets annihilated, like, with John Cena with their chairs match at TLC 2010. So as far as the Nexus is concerned, CM Punk is going to take over as part of Nexus, and he would do some massive shakeups to the Nexus lineup. So Ted DiBiase would join up alongside CM Punk in this particular iteration of the Nexus, and as well as, Michael McGillicuddy was already part of Nexus at this point, but there would be a sort of a promo where CM Punk tells Michael McGillicuddy that it's okay to be yourself, that you don't have to hide your true identity, leading to a segment where he eventually comes out there and refers to Michael McGillicuddy as Joe Hennig, the son of the great Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, but he'll also be, well, primarily in this case with Joe Hennig, he'll be referred to by the moniker Better Than Average. Joe Hennig, along with Ted DiBiase, formed the Fortunate Sons, which was a tag team that they did in FCW. So I actually have them on the main roster as a tag team, taking on D.H. Smith and Tyson Kidd, who were the Hart Dynasty. Now, I wouldn't necessarily have broken them up like they did during that time, but they would still be a tag team, and they would go in as the champions, taking on another multi-generation tag team with Hennig and Dibiase. So I would actually have Hennig and Dibiase as the Fortunate Sons going over the Hart Dynasty to become the unified tag team champions, and to kind of really put over the Nexus, and particularly the Fortunate Sons being a tag team part of that particular stable, to kind of cement them as a credible force to be reckoned with, which is something that WWE just neglected to do with them. With CM Punk taking over as Nexus like he did, this would give an opportunity to do a soft reboot and basically give the Nexus a new life, a new opportunity where they could really start over and shine as the credible stable that they should have been. So in this case, with the Fortunate Sons, I would have them go over the Hart Dynasty and have them walk out as the new unified tag team champions. Now we have is a Falls Count Anywhere match, The Miz taking on John Morrison. Now this is a match that they did on the first Raw of 2011, and that was actually a really great match that they did on that show. Now, they do have a history between these two wrestlers, going back to the ECW brand, where they were both part of a tag team. They were running this sketch show, which was the Dirt Sheet. And in terms of their chemistry, they were able to really mesh really well as a unit. They've won the tag team titles. They've held it for a really long time. Around WrestleMania 25 time, they came up short. Miz turns on Morrison. They go their separate ways. Miz would have his success on Raw. Morrison would have his success on SmackDown. So they would win their respective mid-card belts, with The Miz being the U.S. champ. John Morrison is the Intercontinental champ. You know, they crossed paths at WrestleMania 26, where they were on opposing tag teams. So they could definitely bring up a lot of their past history with each other, you know, both as a tag team and as far as, you know, who's the better breakout wrestler to branch out into singles competition. And that's kind of the whole theme in regards to the build-up leading to this match that takes place at this WrestleMania. And I just figured this would be, you know, a great way to build both particular competitors. And rather than just having The Miz just be WWE champion, I would still have him as like the Money in the Bank holder. I had no issue with that. Probably wouldn't cash in at this point yet, but I really want to give a chance to, you know, really kind of present Miz as a reasonably credible performer without having to, you know, constantly win matches under dubious circumstances like they did. You know, John Morrison, this would also give him a chance to really give him an actual match to work with, as opposed to just kind of being thrown in some meaningless match with no build-up. I honestly think that these two guys could really tear the house down. And they actually did tear the house down on Monday Night Raw, which I thought that was actually one of the few bright spots of the Miz's WWE title reign. I know I've had a lot of heels winning so far on this card, so I don't necessarily mind having John Morrison going over the Miz. As far as the only difference I would make to that Falls Count Anywhere match was determining the victor, that being John Morrison in this case. Now, I wouldn't necessarily have Money in the Bank being on the line, since that would likely overshadow the heated rivalry between Miz and Morrison. So this could just be a straight up Falls Count Anywhere match with no briefcase being on the line or anything like that. But Morrison's going to go over the Miz, but Miz is going to definitely look pretty strong, even during the match and even coming out of the match despite taking the loss. So therefore, you know, even despite that, Morrison's going to go over Miz in my booking for WrestleMania 27 as far as the Falls Count Anywhere match is concerned. Moving along to the fourth match, I would have Mark Henry taking on Sheamus. Not much build up here. these two wrestlers were already on Monday Night Raw. Just kind of give something for Sheamus to do. I mean, the previous year they had a match with Triple H, had a program with him, and they had him as WWE champion throughout the summer. So it wouldn't be right to just kind of leave him out the card. I mean, they put him on like the freaking pre-show. I wouldn't even call it a pre-show since they actually untelevised the match they had with Daniel Bryan in the real WrestleMania 27. It was like they bumped them to the dark match. I think they were supposed to have a match on the main card, but then at some point they just decided to just kind of knock it off the main card. Now, I think this was a year or two before WWE decided to televise their pre-show matches for WrestleMania. I think they started doing that trend with WrestleMania 28 when they started showing some of their pre-show matches on YouTube, and then eventually on the WWE Network when it launched in 2014. But nevertheless, I mean, this match is just determining like who's the better powerhouse wrestler. You know, is it the world's strongest man, Mark Henry, or is it the Celtic Warrior they call Sheamus? But yeah, basically putting Sheamus over Mark Henry here. I mean, Sheamus is, just still trying to kind of regain some of the momentum that he's lost since he dropped the WWE title. And Mark Henry wasn't really doing anything at this point, but I mean, in hindsight, he would go on to have his success once they did the draft where Henry would go on SmackDown, do the heel turn, and the whole Hall of Pain angle that they were doing with him, leading to him winning the World Heavyweight title. So I think this could be the early seeds of this program that they would eventually have at SummerSlam that later that year. But in this case, Henry was the face here, Sheamus was the heel, and I'd figure just kind of put these two guys together and have Sheamus go over Mark Henry. Not a very long match, but just kind of really cement Sheamus here. Basically transferring all the remaining babyface heat that Henry had at this point and transfer it over to Sheamus here. Now we get along to the United States Championship belt being up for grabs. Daniel Bryan going in as the U.S. champion, taking on Jack Swagger with Michael Cole in his corner. Now, I really think that this was a damn shame that they bumped Bryan in the pre-show, especially with all the momentum that he had and even contributing to helping John Cena defeat the Nexus and all the debacle that was going on with Bryan getting fired because he was choking one of the staff members, in this case with Justin Roberts. So he got fired and then he got rehired back by WWE. So he was just going through all that hell in 2010 and even going over The Miz to become the new US champion. So yeah, he and Michael Cole were having this sort of ongoing rivalry that was going on since they premiered the NXT TV show. I believe that was the one where they replaced the ECW on Sci-Fi. So basically, when they had the first season of NXT, it was sort of like a reality competition show before it became the developmental TV show that it would eventually become. So they were doing this rivalry between Bryan and Cole about how Michael Cole just says that Daniel Bryan's a nerd and he basically doesn't even understand what's so fascinating about this wrestler, and all these internet smarks are just all in awe of Daniel Bryan and how much of a following that he had in the independent circuit. And I would continue that whole saga throughout most of 2010. And, Cole was doing that, was going through that heel turn as a commentator and just putting down certain wrestlers and favoring certain ones like The Miz and Alex Riley. But eventually he does befriend a wrestler with Jack Swagger. I wouldn't necessarily have Swagger be a lackey for Michael Cole or being like a manager for Michael Cole, because they had him, like the previous year, they had him win the Money in the Bank briefcase, had him win the World Heavyweight title by cashing it in, only to out to be a chump. And then after he lost the title, like they were just relegating him to back to the mid card, and then the following year, all of a sudden he's like managing a non-active wrestler, like in this case, being a commentator, Michael Cole. So I pretty much switched around Cole and Swagger's roles around and have Swagger be the one to wrestle in this match. Michael Cole would have to step down from his commentating duties, and he would start forming this sort of alliance, this sort of faction that he would have with The Miz, Alex Riley, Jack Swagger, basically known as the coal mine. And this would be kind of like a modern take of the Camp Cornette stable. And that's kind of basically the inspiration behind the coal mine idea that I have as far as that idea is concerned. Cole would be leading a faction, or at least be kind of like the mouthpiece. Daniel Bryan is having to go through all these wrestlers and up to the point where he has to challenge Jack Swagger, who proclaims that he's the All-American American. But on the other hand, Daniel Bryan, back before he was in WWE, he was known as the American Dragon Bryan Danielson. So I think you could easily build this particular match as sort of like the battle for America, especially since this is also involving the U.S. title being up for grabs. So I think this could really fit the whole motif of what this match represents. If Bryan happens to win this match, then he would get an opportunity to get his hands on Michael Cole, concluding this year-long rivalry that they've had. And I think this would actually be a really good to great match, and to really also spotlight not only just Daniel Bryan being on the actual main card, but also giving Jack Swagger an opportunity to really showcase what he could be capable of, rather than just being a certain lackey for somebody, and just actually being like this legit tough guy. Like when they first brought him in on ECW, I would definitely have a Swagger be built up to be a little, if not a lot more credible than he was the previous year, where he was just kind of a chump. Bryan's going to retain the U.S. title in this match here. And then I would probably do like a moment post-match where Daniel Bryan gets his hands on Michael Cole, even locks in the label lock, and he's gonna like completely make Michael Cole like submit, and he just won't let go. Like he's just locking in that label lock, kind of like when Chris Benoit was like locking the cripple crossface. Like whenever he gets like very infuriated, that he would just keep holding on to that crossface until like referees do their best to like restrain Benoit. So it's gonna be kind of like that with Bryan, but Bryan's gonna get that moment, putting Michael Cole in his place. And Bryan's going to go over Jack Swagger here as well. So really giving Bryan his first WrestleMania moment at his first WrestleMania. Then we have is basically a breather, and this is going to be an 8-man tag team match. The Nexus. Now they would just be the Nexus. There's not going to be no Avengers Civil War in this situation where they like split them into two factions, like the new Nexus and the Core. But they could just simply be the Nexus. So in this case, with the shakeup that I mentioned about CM Punk taking over the leadership role of Wade Barrett, so Barrett would have just been off television after the chairs match with John Cena. So Punk takes over, he picks up the pieces with some shakeups included. We have Ezekiel Jackson and Mason Ryan added to the group. Heath Slater and Justin Gabriel will stick around as well, and they would be accompanied by the A-list David Otunga. So they will be taking on Randy Orton, Kofi Kingston, Kane, and the Big Show. Now, David Otunga, as far as the gimmick that I would have him have, would be serving more like a sports coach to a certain team, in this case being the Nexus. So a gimmick that I wanted to do where Otunga would be like wearing a business suit with a suit and tie, and basically like when I was mentioning about him serving as sort of like a sports coach, providing some like a playbook, a game plan for how they're going to manage to perform in their respective matches and a way to win against their respective opponents. It's kind of like that sort of gimmick that I want to give for David Otunga, kind of playing up his intelligence and him as an A-list scholar. So I want to kind of play that up really well. I wouldn't say really well, but as effectively as he could possibly perform. And Otunga would be kind of like that sports coach to a certain sports team. And being that this is professional wrestling, he's a corner piece for the Nexus, and he would accompany that stable to take on Orton, Kingston, Kane, and Big Show. And I would actually have the Nexus going over, in this 8-man tag team match. Probably give them a little more time than they got. I think this match ended like under a minute, which was pretty shocking for a multi-man tag match. It just kind of end like as soon as it began. To really make the Nexus look very credible in this match, and to really rejuvenate some of the momentum that they lost from the past summer of 2010. So I would have the Nexus going over Orton, Kingston, Kane, and Big Show. Now, it sucks for me to kind of waste Randy Orton in a multi-man tag match. I mean, I could have put him in like another high-profile one-on-one match, given that how WWE has presented Orton as this main event superstar of the past 7 years at this point. And it sucks for me to having to book him in this particular match here. There was just so many wrestlers that I've had booked on the card, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to spotlight Orton at that point, which really sucks. But I'd rather have him on the card than just have him off the card completely. But yeah, nevertheless, the Nexus are going to go over Team WWE. Then we have is for the World Heavyweight Championship. Edge going as the champion, defending the belt against Alberto Del Rio. Now, I would keep this match from WrestleMania 27, except I wouldn't have this as the show opener, but I would actually have this match placed in the middle of the card. Now, I wouldn't necessarily bring back Christian either. I just don't really want to present Christian in a way where he's just Edge's lackey. So I would keep Christian off until after WrestleMania 27. I know around this time, like Christian had to take time off due to an arm injury, and so they kind of write him off by having Del Rio injure Christian's arm. So Del Rio debuted in I think it was September of 2010, but it was somewhere in the autumn of 2010, and he was kind of presented as this Mexican rich aristocrat. And he's been racking up so many wins over guys like Rey Mysterio, Christian, the Kofi Kingstons, and even went on to win the 2011 Royal Rumble. Now, this is the part where they completely sabotaged Del Rio. It's like they were building him up so heavily throughout the past several months, racking up wins here and there. It's like they're building him. And like all these dominoes keep constructing on top of one another. And just when it looks like, you're getting that one final piece of domino to complete the puzzle, all of a sudden it just all crashes and burns. And that's kind of what Del Rio's push was in late 2010, early 2011. And then they had him lose a number of matches on SmackDown leading into WrestleMania. And it was just, it got to the point where it just felt like Del Rio can be taken seriously to become a potential world champion. But rather than bringing Christian back and to kind of make it seem like Edge is going to win, so it would just be Edge just being all alone and Del Rio just having Ricardo Rodriguez in his corner. There's no Brodus Clay or anything like that, but just Ricardo Rodriguez being in Del Rio's corner. And basically play out the match the same for the most part. And the finish would be Alberto Del Rio going over Edge instead. And he'll be walking out as the new World Heavyweight Champion. Basically how it should have happened here. I mean, as much as I love Edge, but at this point, I mean, he was starting to go through some neck problems. And I know they had like Edge announces his retirement like the following Raw after WrestleMania, so they didn't like announce anything about Edge's neck problems. I believe Edge might have said somewhere that he was notified in advance that he wasn't in the best shape that he was in as far as his neck is concerned. So I guess they just want to have him go out on top as world champion and have him retire as the champion. But even if I didn't know at the time that Edge was contemplating on retirement at this point, I don't think there was any excuse for why they were building up Del Rio so heavily throughout the first couple months that he was in the company and then just have him lose right then and there. So it just never made any sense to me. So Del Rio's going to go over Edge instead, and he's going to walk out as the new World Heavyweight Champion. Then we have is for the Divas Championship. Now, they did not have the Divas champion defend the belt on her show. And I believe in reality, Eve Torres was the Divas champion, but she didn't have a match on the show. I mean, she was only in like a backstage segment with The Rock, but that was really about it. But yeah, so this is just going to be for the Divas title. And I would actually have Natalya still be champion going in and taking on Beth Phoenix. Now, they actually had a partnership that was going on throughout late 2010, early 2011, when they were trying to fend off the team of Michelle McCool and Layla. I believe they had like a tag team tables match, which they won, and just more of a battle of sportsmanship here and there. I honestly don't care who wins this match, but just have this match just take place for the Divas title and just kind of play up their friendship here. I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to be any like bad blood or anything like that compared to majority of the matches that I presented on this card. But this could just be like a straight up one-on-one match and ends with the handshake. But at least give them a reasonable amount of time for them to pull off their stuff and just try to put on the best match they could possibly have. Now we have is another high-profile match, The Undertaker versus Triple H. Keep it pretty much the exact same match that they did. Undertaker goes over Triple H like how it happened, so I don't necessarily have to reiterate too much. I wouldn't necessarily like try to tease the audience into thinking that Sting was going to come back because they actually had those vignettes during that time where they were making it out to be that Sting was going to show up on WWE, and I think he was wrestling in TNA at the time, but they were teasing a possibility that WWE was in talks of, in regards to the negotiations of getting Sting to compete in the WWE match against The Undertaker. But that didn't happen, and I believe the Raw after Elimination Chamber, where they were going to announce who Undertaker's opponent was, it just turned out to just been Triple H all along. Now, I am aware that Undertaker, at this point, would be the first WrestleMania where Undertaker would be a part-time wrestler at this point, and Triple H would also be a part-timer as well. This is also his first pay-per-view since Extreme Rules, where he had that match with Sheamus, but that was pretty much the last match that he had as a regular performer, and then he would be promoted as the COO of WWE. And yeah, this was just kind of like a thrown in together match, really. I wouldn't necessarily change too much about this match since it basically plays out the same as it did. And Taker goes over Triple H with the Hell's Gate. What else to be said there? And then we also have another breather, and this is a 6-person tag. Zack Ryder, Trish Stratus, Snooki. I know people are gonna like yell at me for mentioning her and the fact that I'm actually keeping her on this card. And they'll be taking on Dolph Ziggler, Michelle McCool, Layla with Vicky Guerrero in their corner. I honestly don't care what you do in this match. I mean, it wasn't even that long anyway, so it could have been a lot worse than it actually was. And I understand a lot of people don't like Snooki and Jersey Shore in general, which was a really popular reality show on MTV during that time. But, they have Zack Ryder on here. He was very much available. And I think they had him in like a Battle Royal match, which was another match that they did on the pre-show, which was untelevised. And they had him in a backstage skit where he was singing Friday by Rebecca Black, which was a song that was viral on YouTube. So Zack Ryder is also part of the Jersey Shore, and Snooki's Jersey Shore as well. So I just figured it'd make the most sense to just kind of pair them up together. And I don't necessarily mind Trish Stratus being part of WrestleMania as well. So, I mean, this match doesn't have to go as long, and just have Ryder, Stratus, and Snooki the ones going over. Then we get to our main event, and this is going to involve the WWE Championship bout being up for grabs. And I would include the special guest enforcer, The Rock. CM Punk defending the belt as WWE Champion, defending it against John Cena. Now, Punk would take over Nexus just like how it happened. Only difference is that we don't split the Nexus into two different factions with the Nexus, the new Nexus and the Core. We're not going to do that bullshit. But yeah, CM Punk would just basically take over the role of Wade Barrett after he gets decimated by Cena in that chairs match at TLC. So Punk picks up the pieces, and he was just coming back from injury at this time. So the first pay-per-view match back that he had at the Royal Rumble, I would have Punk go over Randy Orton with some help from the Nexus in order to become the WWE champion. He would successfully defend that belt in the Elimination Chamber match. John Cena could win like some kind of number one contender series around Elimination Chamber time and earn himself that opportunity to challenge CM Punk for the WWE title. As far as this match, I basically had this be pretty much kind of this, in my universe, the start of this 2-year feud going on between Punk and Cena. And we all know what happened at Money in the Bank 2011, which would definitely be used as like an extension of that feud. And The Rock also playing a part in this match as well, where instead of having him as the guest host of the show, I have him as the special guest enforcer, considering that, Punk is the leader of faction and The Rock being the enforcer that he is to make sure that none of the Nexus members interfere in the match. So Punk, if you know the story about CM Punk and John Cena, Punk just despises everything that John Cena stands for, how he is like the poster boy of WWE. He has all these, most of his fans, I should say, consist of like young children that look up to him, and he does all these sorts of charities. And Punk just kind of lashes out on Cena and just how he takes all the credit as far as those charities that he performs, particularly in this case with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and just basically trashing everything about John Cena, what he stands for, how he's this artificial superhero that these young children look up to, and that I should be your role model. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I'm straight edge. If there's anyone who could proclaim to be a role model, it should be me. It should be CM Punk. It should be the WWE champion that all you fans, all you people of the WWE universe look up to. And that would be the promo that he would cut. And John Cena just can't stand Punk either. But he's been feuding with Nexus throughout the summer and the autumn 2010. He even have to be forced to be part of Nexus around the time where I believe it was like at Survivor Series where Cena was the guest referee, and if he wasn't doing his job properly, then he would end up joining Nexus. And he did, however, join Nexus, but not for very long, and Cena would just basically destroy the Nexus from the inside out, and basically the whole thing with Wade Barrett, which I've discussed countless number of times. But even though Punk and Cena can't stand each other's guts, they do have one thing in common, and that's their disdain towards The Rock. Because Cena already cut a promo on The Rock about how he's been out of the WWE for so long, and that he was more focused on Hollywood and outside ventures and his pursuing career as an actor, and how Cena loves this sport and that he wouldn't do anything to alienate his audience, that he would never leave the WWE. Basically the same promo that he cut. And CM Punk also has a similar vendetta with The Rock as well. So that also brings a unique dynamic as far as the build up to this particular WWE title match, this particular WrestleMania main event is concerned. And I think it just adds a lot more layer and dimension to this particular main event as opposed to what we got with Miz and Cena, even though it wasn't necessarily Miz's fault that he was booked very horribly, but he was just basically serving as like a third wheel behind all the key centric storylines that were going on in WWE, whether it's Cena versus The Rock or the Nexus as far as their civil war that they were doing during that time. But as I think we could really do something really unique with this main event scene. And I think even though Punk and Cena can't stand each other, at the same time, they do have one thing in common. And they're, like I said, their disdain towards The Rock. If you've seen some of their Punk Cena matches, you know how those matches turn out to be. And I would definitely have Punk retain the WWE title over John Cena. And, The Rock being the special outside enforcer, he's doing his best to call the match straight as it is. And Punk is going to go over John Cena and walk out of this match still the WWE champion. I'm not sure if we could do like some kind of like a ref bump or a bump with The Rock where he gets knocked out, and then we could have like all the Nexus wrestlers all come out there and Cena could just fend them off. But if you wanted to, Rock bottoms John Cena, or maybe gives him a spine buster as well, does the people's elbow, and basically close out the show there with The Rock standing tall. So that's basically my main event, and this is just my card for WrestleMania in general. And just leave down your comments in the comment section below. Are there any matches that you would have done differently, or there's any matches that on paper would interest you? So leave down in your comments in the comment section below. I would gladly hear some of your feedback. Thank you all guys for watching, and until next time, this is the Gold Standard Caesar 924 signing out.